Branden, notwithstanding what has been written about this subject in the Objectivist newsletter and the Objectivist, many of us are still confused about the question of whether to describe ourselves as students of objectivism or objectivist. At what point does a student of objectivism become an objectivist?
This is a question which I have been asked many times recently. I think at the outset I should say that I am expressing my own view in this matter, and that I believe that it is not a view that Miss Rand would share. She has indicated a different position in the pages of the Objectivist. To answer this question, let's consider first of all what position would normally be taken if we were talking about some other philosophy, say Platonism or Hegelianism or logical positivism or Kantianism or what have you. Ordinarily, a person is said to be a Platonist or Hegelian or whatever when he A, has a good, firm, authentic understanding of the philosophy in question, and B, is in agreement with that philosophy, that is to say, regards it as true. And I believe that exactly the same criteria is applicable when the philosophy under consideration is objectivism. So that I would say that a person is entitled, if you wish, to call himself an objectivist at that point in his intellectual development when he has studied the philosophy, has a good understanding of it, and regards it or accepts it as true. At that point, he is an objectivist. The term student of objectivism has application, I believe, when a person is still in the process of studying the literature. He doesn't yet regard himself as knowledgeable or fully knowledgeable concerning objectivism. He still is learning what the objectivist philosophy is. Now, there is nobody to give you an examination. It's a matter of intellectual conscience, of one's own sense of responsibility. I believe that the literature is sufficiently clear so that a person can get a very good grasp of the philosophy from studying that which has appeared in print to date. And I do believe that it's possible to study it to the point where you really do understand it and can agree with it. And that is the point when one can, by any ordinary standard, common sense standard, and I think here the common sense standard makes perfectly good sense, call oneself an objectivist. Now, I think I should acknowledge that I have written on this subject a few years ago and expressed a somewhat different position than I do at present. And I can simply say I have changed my mind, and that the view which I took then I have in certain respects changed, so that what I have said to you now is my present understanding of the matter. Yes?
One reason why I've been concerned about this question is this. Suppose I call myself an objectivist and then I go and do something that is wrong in some way or state a viewpoint which is false. Might this not then become a negative reflection on objectivism?
I don't think you can quite approach it that way. Look, to begin with, as I've already indicated, by the time you call yourself an objectivist, you would have to take pains to know that you really are in control of the philosophy. But to take up the two aspects of your question in the order in which you asked them, suppose that you do something wrong, let's say in the conduct of your personal life or what have you. Well, an observer would be very irrational if he would take that as evidence against objectivism. A philosophy doesn't automatically guarantee that everybody who professes to agree with it is always going to act rationally or always going to act ideally consistent with that philosophy. I mean, no philosophical system could guarantee that, and I would condemn the person who's seeing you doing something wrong would, from that, make that the occasion of blaming the philosophy, unless that person were prepared to prove or able to prove that your action followed logically from the philosophy, which of course he wouldn't be able to do in the case you cited. Now, with regard to the second part of your idea there, suppose you put forth a viewpoint which is wrong. Well, look, man is not infallible. You could really have a good control of the philosophy of objectivism, and you might still, on some occasion, put forth a viewpoint which is mistaken. But so what? What's the alternative? It surely cannot be argued that anybody who accepts objectivism and agrees with it and really understands it is infallible thereafter. By the laws of probability, I can tell you right now, anybody and everybody who calls himself an objectivist at some time or another in his life is going to express some viewpoint or idea which is mistaken. That's kind of obvious, surely. But what would be wrong is to claim as part of objectivism some idea which was not anywhere expressed by the originator of objectivism. In other words, an idea that's entirely your own, and that you can have no idea whether or not the originator would or would not agree with it. But suppose you might ask, well, but here's an idea which I think is logically implied by the philosophy of objectivism, even though it's never been stated before. Then you would protect yourself and the philosophy by saying, in effect, I believe that the objectivist philosophy leads to such and such a conclusion in such and such an area. This is my own idea, my own reasoning, but I think it makes sense for such and such reasons. And again, then you're on very safe and clear ground, aren't you? So I think that really needn't be any big problem to anyone.
Assuming that a person holds a rational set of values, can he find happiness in a romantic relationship based on mutual love of each other's values, rather than love of each other because of their values? In other words, when one is in love, what is it that one is in love with?
Well, if I understand your question, one isn't really in love with values or abstract values. One is in love with a person whose character and whose behavior exhibits certain values, if you wish. But it isn't as though one loves an abstraction. No, one loves a concrete. One loves the way particular values, if you wish, are concretized and embodied in the behavior, character, choices, decisions, responses of a concrete, specific individual. This is a very important issue here, actually, and one which I think it's very appropriate for us to discuss in this context, because some students might make the mistake of thinking that if they find some member of the opposite sex who espouses the same philosophical principles as they do, why then that's all they need to know for the purpose of a romance. And I dare say there have been some rather unhappy, short-lived romances, and possibly even marriages, which have come about through that mistaken idea. So, while it's important to know a person's professed philosophical convictions, also pay attention to the question, how do I respond to this person, to this particular person's personality, style, way of doing things, his or her particular choices and responses? First of all, they may not even be consistent with the abstract philosophy he professes. But aside from that, even if they are, you may not be particularly personally responsive to that person on the grounds of the individual way that those ideas or values are implemented or expressed in his particular person. Using in the modern colloquialism, that person may not turn you on. His particular individual style, sense of life, may not be such as to provoke in you the kind of feelings that are appropriate to a response.